Welcome everybody to Spokes 2021 episode 2. And after our first episode, where we tried to answer which was the best car in the world before 1940, and with the response we got with that, we decided to have another episode to answer which was the best car in the world between 1940 and 1990. So, on behalf of my club, Classic Drivers Club, we welcome you all to this program. And we have a very special host today who's going to be taking you through this entire show from this point onwards. And that's our very dear friend, Mr. Gautam Sen. He is well known to all of you and everyone in the car circle. So without any further delay, I'd like to ask Mr. Sen to take over.
Thanks, Shobik. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you from different parts of the world, from what I can make out. I'm not sure whether I saw Malcolm Forrest. I think we have someone from Brazil, from Sao Paulo, early in the morning for him there. And well, I don't know, we should have had somebody from Japan. Next time you have to have somebody from Japan and saying good night as we start the proceedings. So good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, as I said again, good morning. Very happy to have all of you out here. I think we all share the same passion, the same obsession, the same, let's say, interests. And not to lose too much time, let's get going. As you know, the theme this time is which was the best car in the world, as per some of you, 7 of you speakers from around the world, which were the best car in the world from the period 1940 till 1990. 50 years exactly. And amongst the speakers, we have people who are all quite known to each other and otherwise. There's Ivo Groen, who is speaking from Gothenburg in Sweden at the moment. He's Dutch and he's working for a Chinese car maker, Link, at the moment. He's been for many years with Citroën, with PSA, with Peugeot Citroën Group. He's been a Citroën designer for many years, and then with DS. So Ivo is well known as a designer and quite an authority on design and cars and automobile matters. Then we have Yeliz Belibe. Yeliz is from Turkey. She is the president of the Turkish Federation, which is a part of FIVA, which is the international federation across the world. And Yeliz is very, very active in Turkey and otherwise. And she does some very interesting, very fascinating videos with children, with women, with youngsters, and with historic vehicles. So Yeliz is also going to be speaking. I'm not going to introduce the cars for the moment, for the simple reason that let the speakers themselves introduce the cars that they are speaking about. The third speaker will be Rafiq. Rafiq is an old friend, known him for a very, very long time now, as a fellow journalist at various points of time, and also as an enthusiast. In fact, we met we happen to have shared a Formula One drive long time back. Rafiq's from Morocco. He runs a restoration shop there, very good one, and is very much involved at various levels. So Rafiq is the third speaker. The fourth is Ravi Nene from India. Ravi is a Citroenist, in fact, is a great fan of Citroens once again, and we should see what car he's talking about. Ravi is otherwise an architect and also has a small collection, which is very nice. He's completely into cars, and Ravi is the fourth speaker. The fifth speaker will be Mr. T.R. Raghunandan. Raghu, as we know him, is ex-bureaucrat. He was very senior person in the Indian government at various points of time. He has been in India and otherwise also. He has some very interesting cars. He has an Austin 7, which he uses regularly, an MG TC, and he's restoring a fabulous car. I don't know whether he wants to talk about that, but he has, his favorite, what he thinks was the best car during these 50 years, and he'll talk about that. The sixth person is Michael Robinson. Mike, as we know him, is also a very, very well-known designer and has been in the center of automotive design in Europe in a big way. Was design director of Benetton. Before that, he was heading Fiat And he's also been a designer with Lancia, currently freelancing. He's been working with various designers around the world, including various companies in the world, and mostly a lot with China. So Mike's there to talk about, well, his favorite car, which also happens to be mine, but I should not sneak that in. And the last person who will be there will be Jos Tunes. Jos is with FIVA, with the Federation, with the National Federation. And Jos is from Holland. He lives very close to Eindhoven. So anybody who's into either Philips or into football will know of Eindhoven, of course. And Jos is, again, a real enthusiast. He has some very interesting cars. And in fact, he's going to be quite close to home when he talks about what he thinks is his favorite car, at least in terms of the brands. So let's get it rolling.
So the rules of the game is very simple. As last time, we have 3 minutes each per speaker plus 1 minute space. Of course, we're going to give some time for each speaker to set up because of technology. And then, so we're going to have about speakers making the case for about between 35 and 40 minutes. And then we're going to have a bit of a question answer section for about 10 minutes. So you can write in your questions to speakers on the chat box, and we'll shortlist them and ask directed to each speaker. And then we're going to have an online vote. And at the end of this the flow of events, we'll probably come to a winner, and you can vote which is the best car in the world between 1940 and 1990. So over to Ivo.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm a 1967 model, so this car, which is the 1957 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Roadster, specifically the Roadster, was born before me, but it is still a very important car for everyone, including myself. And of course, as a designer, I just want to make a very quick focus on the gentleman who's in charge of designing this masterpiece, Friedrich Geiger. And he's a guy who worked up his career all the way to the top of the highest position in design of what I would call the oldest car maker in the world, and also the car maker that could claim to make the best cars in the world. And of course, the 300 SL Gullwing is the car preceding the Roadster. The Roadster is a better driving car, and we'll get into that later. Of course, the Gullwing is the most iconic car, but the 1957 Roadster that replaced it, I'll get into it, is an even better car. This SL Mercedes Heritage, of course, is what I would call the first supercar to actually be sold for customers. And it drove Mercedes into the experimental cars, the C111, as you can see here, from 1969, and just basically was the most avant-garde engineering at the time being produced. Just as a personal note, this is a picture I took in 1984 when I was a youngster, joining the first Concours d'Elegance of my life in Eugene, Oregon, of all places, where I was raised. My father took me there, and I discovered this car in the flesh. As it turned out, the car was owned by the father of a girl I knew in high school. So, small world. Anyway, that's the picture I had. Of course, this car, the Gullwing, was based on a race car, and it was impossible to get into the car without actually tilting the steering wheel, which is kind of a neat feature. What has to be told is that the 300 SL was actually born as a roadster first, and then it became a closed car as a racing car. And then, of course, with the lattice frame tubes, they couldn't actually have deep door cuts, and that's where the Gullwing doors came from. So the Gullwing is actually a compromised car, and the Roadster is actually much closer to the original concept. So a very famous car, won the Mexican Carrera Pan America and a lot of other races we won't go into now, we don't have time, but a race car for the road. This is an interesting picture of its baby sister, the 190 SL. And you can see some of the designers working on that car. And of course, it was totally inspired from the 300 SL design-wise. This 300 SL, to make a long story short, it was Max Hoffman's claim to fame as the Mercedes importer to the US. And this was shown as a real show car, but actually as a pre-production car alongside the 190 SL in New York, making an amazing impact for Mercedes. It was obviously coming out of the Second World War. This is the 190 SL still looking in its prototype stage as it was presented. This is a rare factory picture of these beautiful cars. You can see the space frame, lattice frame structure with the bodies being assembled to it in the final assembly line. And then, of course, in 1957, a Roadster was presented. And this was really what I would call a supercar, roadster luxury car that you could actually use because it wasn't so hot inside. And you could actually, as you can see, the door shuts were much lower. So you could actually get into the car without too much trouble. It also had a less trickier rear suspension. So it was much easier to drive at the limit without going off the road. So it was actually a much improved car, and it also had, of course, disc brakes later on in its production span. This is a quick sketch, just like a napkin sketch from Friedrich Geiger, with the idea of the Roadster as the Gullwing was already being built. So they were obviously thinking about it from the beginning. You can even see in this picture, we don't have too much time to go into it, but they were even thinking about doing these more vertical rear wings. But what's most interesting about this early sketch is the vertical headlamps, which really gave the look of the Mercedes to come for the next decades. This is a clay model, white clay model in the studio at Sindelfingen. And you can see on one side it has the original Gullwing rear, and on the other side it has the raised wing. And you can see that gives a totally different balance. Very nicely balanced car, but not as sexy as what they finally picked, which is the A side here with a sloping rear, that bow tail look. The car had a perfect package with a mid front engine, low slanted engine, lots of luggage space, perfectly balanced weight distribution, and room to travel for 2+ luggage. Hand-built car, you can see it was built in the same assembly line as the 190 SL. So that's why the 190 SL was a very expensive car too. They were both hand-built. And this 190 SL, of course, was not as fast as its Italian or British competitors, but it was a way into the luxury segment, and it really had a big impact in sales for Mercedes. Not everyone could afford the 300 SL Roadster, and this was the baby one, a little bit more affordable, not as fast. Here you have this beautiful plan view where you can see that bow tail that I love so much. Perfect shapes, different approach to the camtail designs that were happening already from the 30s on in German supercars, but it was just much more beautiful. So never mind that the CD value was a little bit worse than a camtail. It was just a beautiful shape. Here you have a Geiger rendering of the Roadster, watercolor. Here it is with more orthographic views, of course, design drawings to build the car. One of the first cars coming off the assembly line with steel wheels, yeah, no alloys, no knockoffs. That's how it was presented as the official picture shown here. As I said before, from 1961 onwards, it had disc brakes, just like an E-Type. So this was a fuel-injected car that would go, depending upon the final gear ratio of the 4-speed gearbox, it would go 260 kilometers an hour in 1957. And a couple of years later, it had disc brakes. So perfect road holding, fastest car in the world, production car, faster than a Ferrari, and disc brakes all around. And this is, we don't have time to develop it in the 3 minutes that I'm running out of, but the Roadster is even more interesting in that it introduced this vertical ferret-in glass headlamp. And that was, when you compare it to all the Ferraris and all the other cars, which were still using standard round headlamps, that was really a departure in design. And of course, this was held on to until the early 70s SL, which was designed by Joseph Galitziner, which was going for the opposite, which was the horizontal look, a very wide, horizontal, slim look. So the design impact of the 1957 Roadster was even held within Mercedes for almost 20 years. So pretty impressive. Of course, it was also sold with a hardtop. This is an interesting design, which was not retained with an integrated spoiler. Very interesting, but you could get full weather protection with a hardtop. Carrying right along, it was a hand-built car, as you can see, with this beautiful body and the people, hand finishing this car, beautifully made. It was still light, even though it was now no longer aluminum bodied, but steel. And it had all the luxury car amenities, such as a beautifully trimmed leather interior. And this is a beautiful car, which I love, owned by Maharaja of Mondal, a 1958 model, so one of the first series. Just to conclude, this car was a jet set car, but it was a car made for the road. They made these in about 1,400 examples, and I think most of them have survived because they're really worth keeping, and they're worth a lot of money now for a good reason, is that they are a design icon. If you look at the way they're crafted, there's nothing to be criticized. Everything is beautifully crafted and made. And I would just say, without further ado, the next step was, of course, another car I love, which is the Pagoda. And here you can see the same designer, Friedrich Geiger, in 1957, working on the next car, which was the Pagoda, which is another story. So I give the floor to Yeliz, if she's there, to talk about her cars. And I will just leave you with this image of this beautiful car, which to me is ticking all the boxes: best design, best engineering, best quality, and still iconic design today. Thank you very much.
Hi, thanks very much, Ivo, for the presentation. It's excellent on the 300 SL. Both in coupe and roadster form. Now, Yeliz is going to talk about another convertible, in fact. So let me pass on. Let's get Yeliz on to the next, to her favorite car, what she thinks is the best.
As the Silver Shadow was the first Rolls-Royce to feature a monocoque chassis, this what we call a monocoque chassis is also called a structural skin, which loads supported by an object's external scale, similar to an eggshell. The word comes from French, single shell. And the Corniche, my favorite history is this one is of course the iconic model for Rolls-Royce, the most well-known, and for me the most beautiful one. It comes to life in 1960s with 2 doors, and the body style for Corniche was introduced in 2000s. This part of the presentation is for how I felt when I drove a 95 Rolls-Royce Corniche, which is also known as the Bentley Corniche. For me, I generally love the rounded lines of 50s and 60s classic cars, but this model broke all my thoughts and ideas about this rounded lines of classics. As you know, driving an old car can be difficult, and everyone likes it from the outer side. But the sound of the, in Turkish we have a saying, the sound of the drum is better from outside. So it is difficult to drive a classic car. But with a Rolls-Royce Corniche, you don't leave those kinds of difficulties because it gives you all the luxury you need with the brakes and steerings and everything with the electrical systems is without any troubles. You can drive anywhere. We can say there are some classic car brands that are cute. This one is cute. Oh, this one is strong, but this one is like we can say a veteran in a good condition for its age, and has all the luxury needed. This Corniche was built in between 1970 and 1975, and it was total 537 units production. And the only rounded side we can see from the front is the lights. The other sides are all rectangular. So this adds a huge, strong looking. The front side is full of electrical items. It comes from Mr. Royce, I think. And also what affects me much is like the brakes. When you put your foot on the brakes, it's like it feels like there are some bubbles under your feet. It made me so confused to feel that way because I drove many cars, and this was a unique thing. And later on, I understood it was the reason because the brakes system was knitted like a web underline. There are some photos we shoot for a magazine just to keep classic lovers' attention. This is by the Bosphorus, Istanbul. Will we go on with the speech as well? So I can cut it here now.
That's good, Yeliz. I think we get the idea
Okay.
of the reason why you really like the Corniche.
Okay.
Yeah. And thank you very much, Yeliz, for this lovely presentation. I think we should move on to our next speaker. The next speaker is Rafiq, who's from Morocco. Rafiq, please do remember to keep it. I know it's your favorite car, and you can talk for hours, so but do keep the time limit.
Yes, I will try to do my best because Suvik, can you launch the presentation, please? Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so why I think the 911 is the greatest sports car of all time? To me, the 911 represents one of the most iconic sports cars ever. First thing, I will start with its shape and silhouette, which is known to anyone everywhere, by kids, by youngsters, adults, the elderly. Everybody knows the shape of a 911. Can we move on to the next slide? Next, please. No, please go back. Go back. After this one, thank you. I say that the 911 is a car that has won my heart since I can remember. I love the shape, as I said, and it's a sports car with the back seats, so you can take the kids with you. We know that it's a car which is tail happy because of the position of the engine, which is located behind the rear axle. And everybody predicted that the car will not last or not be sold more than a couple of years. And after 58 years, this car is still in the market. I love the rear end of the car, especially the turbo versions. And I know that every kid had a poster of the 911 Turbo, and I was one of them. And I always dreamt, or I always dreamed about owning this car. And I'm happy to say that I have two 911s. It's, what can I say? It's a fast, it's a strong, and is easy to live with. Not many cars are easy, sports cars are easy to live with. It's reliable car, especially the air-cooled engines. I never had any heating problems, especially in a warm country or in a hot country. And you can drive it to work on the weekdays and race it on the weekends. And not many cars offer this kind of opportunity. Or and one phrase or one sentence that I will say is that it's the 911 is really the car you can marry and live with happily ever after, except for the Widowmaker, the first generation of the Turbo. And once again, after more than 5 decades, almost 6 decades, 58 years exactly, it's still intact. The DNA of this car is still intact. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, and 5 facts that only true Porsche fans know. The father of this iconic car is Ferdinand Alexander Porsche. His nickname is Bootsy, and he's the son of Ferry Porsche. And the person who worked with him in this project is Mr. Erwin Komenda. He was head of bodywork at Porsche. The car was introduced in Frankfurt Motor Show in 1963. And next slide, please. The second fact is that the car was not going to be called 911 because of a dispute with Peugeot. The car was going to be named 901. But Peugeot at that time had, let's say, they had registered as a trademark all the 3-digit numbers with 0 in the middle. So Peugeot said no way for the 901, and Porsche simply added 1 instead of 0 in the middle, and it became 911. And in German, 911. The third fact, the car, the 911, was going to be axed in the late 70s. Porsche didn't think that the car will last more than 10 years, and they launched the 928, and thinking that the 928 will finally replace the 911. But no. Consumers, customers, 911 fans kept buying the car, and they kept it. And once again, the car is still here, and it's one of the most or longest model in the car history that has made it more than 5 decades. Number 4, the car, or the fourth fact, the car has always been manufactured in the Zuffenhausen factory in Germany. And the fifth fact, which proves the reliability of this magnificent automobile, is that 70% of all the 911s made are still on the road today, which is a record. Now we move on to the evolution of this beautiful icon. Next slide, please. Next. Yes. So after 58 years, we have had 8 generations. So the original, the G model, the 964, the one I have, and then the 993, which is the last air-cooled 911. The 996, which was not my favorite, because at that time Porsche was cutting costs. Porsche was not doing well in the late 80s, actually early 90s. The company went almost bankrupt. The 997, the 991, and finally the 992. And what can I say again? Next slide. Now we go on to the 10 reasons why the 911 is considered the benchmark of sports cars. Again, timeless design. Nobody ever believed that an evolution of the VW Beetle and the first Porsche, which was the 356, was going to become a miracle in motor history. And I say it, the 911 is a miracle in motor history.
Rafiq, you'll have to
very quickly.
Yes.
The second thing is that it has a brilliant air-cooled flat 60 engine, which was very reliable. It's a car that has been in the roads or on the roads for 58 years. It came out in many versions and models. So Carrera, RS, Targa, Turbo, Cabriolet, Speedster, Roadster, you name it. There was a 911 for every style, for every person. The 911 surpassed or exceeded 1 million units sold back in 2017. And one very important figure is that it won 30,000 race championships and victories. And this is a record. Let's move on to the next slide, please. The famous people associated with the 911. Of course, as any product, any thing, there are always visionaries behind a successful product or behind a successful reference. So one of the people behind the 911 is Ferry Porsche. And he said the 911 is the only car you could drive on an African safari or at Le Mans, to the theater or through the New York City traffic, and it's the 911. Can we move on to the other slides, please, of famous people associated with the 911, please? Again, next. Next, perfect. So these are the people associated with the success of the 911. You have Anatole Lapine, who is the one of the designers from Riga. You have Harm Laguet, who is Dutch, one of the most important Porsche designers. You have also Steve McQueen, who is associated to the 911, Mr. Jackie X, Walter Röhrl, who said that a garage without a 911 is nothing more than a bleak and barren hole. You have the last designer, Michael Moore. He's from Germany. We go to the next slide, please.
Rafiq, please.
Yes, last slide. You have Alois Rolf, who has always perfected the 911, Magnus Walker, and Rob Dickinson from Singer. One last slide, please. My love affair with the 911. We're going to pass the ads. Next slide, next. Please go to my slide with my love affair with the 911. So this is two of my 911s, the original one, the G model, and the 964. And I've owned the 911 since I was 30 years old. Today I'm 51, so 21 happy and joyful years driving this car. And some people, I just found out, I said that some people buy cars to impress their friends and neighbors. I drive a 911 to impress myself. And thank you very much for listening to this presentation.
Thank you. That was a very, very spirited presentation indeed. And I think Rafiq made a very strong case for the 911. We have to now move on to the next speaker.
So it was 22nd of August, 1962. The French President Charles de Gaulle was on his way to the Orly Airport, Paris, when 12 gunmen opened fire on his motorcade in an assassination attempt. At 70 miles an hour, with two tires having burst, the driver managed to accelerate out of skid and drive the president away to safety. This was thanks to the self-leveling suspension and the incredible driving dynamics of his car. That was a Citroën DS. And that's the car I'm going to talk about today. Now, when we talk of best car in the world, it has to be a car that's groundbreakingly extraordinary. And that's what the DS was when it swept the world off its feet at the Paris show launch in 1955. The DS notched 12,000 orders at the end of the first day of the show itself. And by the end of the 10 days of the Paris show, it had racked up 80,000 bookings, a feat that was unmatched for 60 years after that. To elaborate a few of the extraordinary qualities that made the DS, or Goddess as she was called, what it was the first mass-produced car to have hydropneumatic self-leveling suspension, disc brakes, directionally moving headlamps which would move in the direction that the car would turn in. It had a central hydraulic system that powered not only the brakes and steering, but also the suspension, the clutch, the transmission, and what have you. The car's rear track was smaller than the front, which helped control understeer and gave the car its beautiful and smooth submarine-like shape, wonderfully aerodynamic shape, as you can see. All of this resulted in a car that set new standards in ride quality, handling, and road holding. Now, the beauty of the self-leveling suspension, as you can see, is when the car is parked, it literally sits down, hugging the ground, its rear wheel almost invisible. And upon starting, it'll just rise up majestically and drive away. That's the beauty of the suspension, and that's the beauty of the car. The car was front-wheel drive way back in the 1950s, so it could have a flat rear floor with a wonderful and luxurious rear seat. And as if all this was not enough, the car simply looked drop-dead gorgeous. It was designed by sculptor and designer Flaminio Bertoni and aeronautical engineer André Lefebvre. It looked like nothing else that the world had ever seen. The car had a large glass house, a fiberglass roof, pillarless doors, and a single spoke steering wheel, all meant to enhance the feeling of lightness to the extent that one could feel as if the car would just about launch and start flying away. So the DS was not just a great car. I will say it was a celebration of the best that technology and design could offer. More importantly, and I believe this is very critical, it was not just a one-off concept car that was loaded with futuristic features. It was a car that was made to be practical, to run, to have a successful 20-year production run with tweaks continuously along the way. And 1.5 million cars were made and sold successfully in these 20 years. All in all, as a DS owner puts it, the car reflected Citroën's love for doing everything in their own delightfully unorthodox way. The iconic magazine Classic and Sports Car in 2009 voted the DS as the most beautiful car of all time. And one of their jury, the design guru Marcello Gandini, wrote, he says, at that time, I think it was complete folly and madness from a business point of view. A few people may have thought of all these ideas, but it was real bravery to implement all of them in one car. Earlier on in 1999, the car of the century poll placed the DS third among the greatest cars ever produced, right behind the Model T and the Mini, as you all know. Over the years, the DS came with several variants. There was the Pallas, the luxury version, the station wagon, and even a convertible. There were a few one-off versions made by Chaperon and all the other bodybuilders, like the Coupe, the Presidential Limousine, and many other variants. Naturally, the DS became the natural favorite of several heads of state, business tycoons, actors, designers, celebrities, and so many people in its time. The engines on offer were the 4-cylinder 1911cc derived from the Traction Avant, and a few years later, a 2175cc, which was called the DS21. And lastly, in 1973, they had a 2347cc EFI version. Now look at, even as a station wagon, the car looks so sleek and so beautiful. I think there are very few cars that can carry off a station wagon shape so beautifully. So the more we talk about the DS, the more excited we'll all get. My 3 minutes are over, I think. So let's conclude here that the Citroën DS was the best car made between 1940 and 1990. Thank you, folks.
Thanks very much, Ravi. That was a really, I can see, a very passionate call for the DS, and I think it's no doubt a very, very deserving vehicle, a very important one. And Ravi is sharing, obviously, his scale model. He's got millions of scale, not millions, but at least hundreds of scale models of the DS. And I think that in itself is worth another discussion some other time. So let's carry on with our next speaker. That's Raghu T.R. Raghunandan from Bangalore. And he is going to make a case for the Dino, well, not the Ferrari, but technically the Dino 246 GT. Raghu,
Thank you, Gautam. Yeah, so my favorite car for that period, for the 50s to the 90s, is a Dino 246 GT. It's not been easy. I am a terribly indecisive person, and this era has plenty of sports cars. So I use certain objective criteria to essentially justify a completely irrational personal choice, because I love sports cars, and sports cars are not practical. But passion is not practical either. I mean, you don't fall in love with a girl because you have worked out a jigsaw puzzle of your life and she is the missing piece. You fall in love with her and then you build your life's puzzle around her. And that's the same thing with a car. You see, if I were left to myself, I would only buy sports cars, and then I would work my life's priorities around the cars. My second reason for choosing the Dino is that I love something that is groundbreaking. Whether it is the mechanicals, the aesthetics, and the styling, it has to be different. It may not be beautiful from everybody's perspective, but it has to be something that was built in the face of opposition. And this is something like a Romeo and Juliet syndrome. There must be a bit of opposition to make something really, interesting. And here there was opposition from the old man, Enzo. He did not want to build such a small car. He was more interested in building a car that was, representative of his supercar vision. And that is the reason why you do not find the Ferrari prancing horse anywhere on the Dino. It is not branded as a Ferrari, and there's a lot of argument on whether it is a Ferrari or it is a Dino, but it is branded as a Dino. Now, the Dino series were manufactured between 67 and 1974. They started as the 206 GT, about 150 cars were made, which were less than a ton, 900 kilos. And they were smaller and lighter than the more numerous Dino 246 GT, which was produced later on. And a large number was produced. In Ferrari terms, a large number was produced, around 3,760. To me, the car represents an ideal marriage between the quality of the mechanicals and the quality of the aesthetics. If you look at it from any angle, it is really very great. But the fabulous thing about the car was its new V6 powertrain with twin overhead cams, naturally aspirated, using 3 Weber carburetors. This was a breakaway because Ferrari wanted to build cars with 8-cylinder engines. So the top speed was about 148 mph, which is pretty good for anybody. But what a lovely engine this was. This was such a popular engine. It was used for many other cars. It was designed by Ferrari, but it was also used by Fiat. In fact, the other car that missed being my favorite car is the Lancia Stratos. And that used the Dino engine. And that engine sings. I mean, it literally sings. If you listen to it on YouTube, it is a maestro. It's a tenor with the range and the power of a Pavarotti. Turn on the key, the engine starts with a wheezy, eager tick over, and then it rises to a delightful rasp, when the throttle is tapped. Now, if you look at the Dino from any angle, it's a flawless beauty. It was designed by Pininfarina, and this is the blueprint of the coupe. And you will see here that it has a rear window, which is very interesting, because if you look at the blueprint of the Targa top, that rear window is missing. So if you look at the car, it looks beautiful from any angle. And what strikes you immediately is the arched wings over the wheels. Later cars had a slight flare. If you look at this car, this is, as I said, the picture of the coupe with the window on the side, and this is the one without the window with only 3 slats. Now, if you look at the car, this is the later model car with the little wheel arches to accommodate the fatter tires. And, I also like the fact that the headlights do not have a Perspex cover. Some people put a Perspex cover. The Perspex cover looks very good on an E-Type, but it doesn't look good on a Dino. If you look at it, this kind of a wedge cutaway for the headlight looking purposefully forward is a fabulous shape. Now, the other very striking design feature of the Dino is its forward curving rear windscreen. Typically, mid-engine cars have a disadvantage in the sense that rear vision is limited. But by having this large screen with a couple of buttresses on either side, it gives a fabulous look to the rear of the car, which is not matched in many other mid-engine cars. Now, if you walk around the car, you will notice that the rest of its embellishments are pretty understated. Look at this picture, and you will see that the intake for the air is very beautifully sculpted into the side of the car. if you look at the previous picture, you will see that the tail lights are classic round tail lights. They don't try to mess around, don't try to be clever with the tail lights. The bumpers are not wrap around. They only go around a little bit. The grille is pretty much, understated. It doesn't have any chrome. Nothing takes away from the pure shape of the car. Now, if you look at the interior, fabulous, absolutely fabulous. The instrument cluster is a no-nonsense instrument cluster with everything neatly, packaged in an oval. And look at those seats with those horizontal slats. I mean, this is the kind of interior that will welcome you inside, and it solidifies the impression of a car built for speed and for mechanical music on an open road. Now, I read somewhere that, there's a thumb rule to arrive at what separates an outstanding design from a merely good one. And I believe that a vehicle must look good both as a spider or with its top up. And that is where the Dino really scores. It really looks good from every angle. Now, also colors. I mean, I showed you so many colors of the car, and I do not have a favorite color. A Ferrari red car would be a beauty. That's a no-brainer. But what about a yellow car or a darker wine red one? Maybe a blue or a steel blue one, even a white car or a black one like this one. Now, here's the sad part. I have never seen a Dino in the flesh and blood. I admire Dino from far, just like I'm smitten by Monica Bellucci. I've never met her. But I'm told that there is a Dino in the city where I live. And it's only 15 kilometers away from my house, but it is sadly parked in a plastic bubble. Nobody I know has seen it being driven on the roads. And what a waste of a car. So yet someday I hope I will meet somebody who has a Dino. I hope I'll make friends with him or her. And maybe someday I'll be able to drive my dream. So for me, it's the Dino. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Raghu. That was very, very passionate. I mean, I guess just goes with the car, with Monica Bellucci, with Italy, and with everything else. We will let Mike. Next speaker is Michael Robinson, who lives in Italy. We're going to talk about Italian cars. And though he is American, let him then go forth and speak with the same level of passion.
Okay, thanks a lot, Gautam. I'm going to talk about the Miura, the Lamborghini Miura today. And one interesting thing that since you and I wrote a book some time ago called the Bertone Collection, I've always thought it'd be wonderful as a car designer to write a book entitled Who Copied Who? It talks about how so many cars look alike and but copying is a very negative part of car design. And I don't like negative aspects of any part of life. So how can I transform that into a positive aspect? And the way to do that, we call it who influenced who. Influencing people with our car design is an extremely valid point of view for cars to be able to say, you know what, this car I did went on to influence many, many generations after that. And the reason why I chose the Lamborghini Miura today, because it's one of the crossroads vehicle that changed the world after it came out. 1965, Ferruccio Lamborghini presented at the Torino Auto Show just a chassis of the Miura. And he presented this whole chassis with a mid-engine layout and shocked the world. And at that show, Lucio Bertoni came to visit Ferruccio, and he said, you know what, this is a car I'd like you to design. And Lucio Bertoni said, absolutely, we're very happy to do that. So what he did is Giugiaro had just left Bertoni in 1965, right after that show. And so he hired Marcello Gandini, a very young, unproven designer. This is the very first project Gandini did when he was 27 years old. And Gandini designed this car in 4 months, from white paper to the Torino Car Show, 4 months, a full, totally functional prototype. At that show, it just shocked the world. First of all, because it's 1 meter tall. The entire car comes up to my knee, basically. And so it's incredible to think how all this beauty can fit in such a low-lying car. And these three guys are the guys that are responsible for this car. They're all good friends of mine. Paolo Stanziani is no longer with us, but he was the guy that designed the chassis. Gianpaolo Dallara is one of the top race car chassis manufacturers, engineers of the world. And of course, Marcello Gandini, who's now 83, is one of the best car designers of all time. And the only ones missing this photograph is Giotto Bizzarini, who designed the 12-cylinder transversal engine, which is a very small 12-cylinder, which fit behind the rear seats. So one of the interesting things about what experts say about this car is what SuperCarNet said, there's very few cars managed to change the automobile world like the Miura. It was so radical compared to normal engineering at the time, it made Ferraris and Aston Martins look totally outdated. People were shocked when this car came out. So it redefined the very concept of a sports car. It was basically the very first true supercar or hypercar, as they call them today. And certainly, one of the most exotic things about this car is it actually was so sexy. It wasn't the first mid-engine car ever out there, but it was the most important one, the most well-known mid-engine car in the history of automobile engine. Interesting thing about the production, the presentation we just heard about the Miura, about the Dino, is that Ferrari was against mid-engine cars. So they're too powerful for normal people. We need to put them only into the hands of race car drivers and never into the hands of the public. Well, when the Miura came out, Ferrari had to change his point of view, because from that point on, the front engine cars were getting more and more and more and more in Ferrari, and less and less and less after the Miura, because they did more and more mid-engine cars. Now, almost all Ferraris are made with mid-engine cars, thanks to his arch rival, Ferruccio Lamborghini. Another interesting thing, the crossroads, not only from front engine to mid-engine, but also from cab rearward era to the cab forward era. This all passes through the Lamborghini Miura. The cars before on the top are all front engine cars, except for the GT40, the Jaguar E type, the Ferrari GTO, the Chevy Corvette, the Shelby Cobra. All these cars are just iconic cars, but they all had their cab in the back and a long, long section nose. Well, also the Lamborghini Miura also had a long, long section nose with a cab rearward layout, but it had the mid-engine layout. And all the cars that came after this had the same mid-engine layout, but they started moving the cab forward, more forward and forward, until finally we came into the modern cab forward era. So it sits right at the crossroads between the old era and the new era of automobiles. One of the sexiest part about this Miura is the clamshell opening concept. The exotic cars, supercars, and hypercars, whatever you want to call it, if you open up this way, it's not a Fiat Panda. It has to be something really expensive, really exotic, really, really sexy, because this is the only car that started this whole concept. Also, the Alfa Romeo 33 Stradale came a year after this, done by Marazzi, designed by Scaglione, also the same opening, clamshell opening. The Lamborghini Marzal came the year after that, designed by the same Gandini, used the clamshell opening. The Carabo was the first cab forward car ever to exist in history of automobile, also used the Miura clamshell. The Lancia Stratos HF, which Robbie just mentioned, also has a clamshell. This won 3 world championships in the rally championships. And finally, Giugiaro's Bora was designed with the same type of clamshell with a mid-engine car. So this car was one of the most influential car designs in the history. Here's a couple of things that the experts have said about that. Few cars achieve legendary status. Well, even fewer continue to live up to these every year afterwards. And after 4 decades of the introduction, only Lamborghini Miura is the most sexiest, most legendary car on. This is Haggerty saying this. The Drive says it's beyond a revolution for its time. This was limited to only a few vehicles, and nothing before or since has ever been this exotic. Such a rare and beautiful car with significance to history. David C. Davis thought it was funny. The Miura is the name of the meanest, wildest bull there is, and Old Man Lamborghini chose this name for that exact reason. Finally, Road and Track says, today the Miura is considered the original supercar, or hypercar, if you want to call it, a motoring landmark, which inspired all the future exotic cars from that point on, and it's almost always voted the sexiest car of all time. So with this very brief presentation, I just want to point out this car is very close to my heart. I was the director of design at Bertone for many years, and this was in our museum there. And I can tell you that it makes my skin get all goosebumps just thinking about this car, how sexy it is, how beautiful it is, and how important it is to the history of automobiles. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you very much. I shouldn't confess anything, but I just want to say that it's getting difficult, more and more difficult as it's progressing, because the kind of cars that you guys have chosen, each one of them, oh my God, they really make my heart grow. Boom. Really. Thank you so much. It's Jos, the last speaker of the day. And well, let Jos take over. Here's another brand, another mark who which is a favorite of the speaker. So Jos, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gautam. I hope you can all hear me. I'm up to some very stiff competition. Let that be clear. Let me share my screen. And as the introduction said, I'm going to tell you something about the Jensen. Before I come to the final topic, a very brief overview of the early years of Jensen. They started off as a coach worker, building very, very nice examples of tourers and closed vehicles, and also lorries and trucks. This is a woody wagon, one in existence. This is a very beautiful example of a post-war car, Earl's Court. And this is the first Interceptor. And they also made vehicles for others. And if you move on to the 50s and 60s, they became renowned for the glass fiber bodies, the 541. And this is the later type of the 541. And the CV8, by some considered the most ugliest car in the world, and by others voted as a very nice example of British engineering. This is a P66.
You don't want to add that you are one of them, but never mind.
It's coming. But you saw the P66 that was supposed to be a follower. Here we see the production line, and that's where trouble started initially for Jensen. They had a large factory, and they needed something to follow on to the CV8, and the Austin Healey was no longer produced by them. The Interceptor, as proposed, was rejected by the board of directors. That now was no longer the Jensen brothers, but they had something up their sleeve, something called a four-wheel drive car. And this is actually the prototype. And Jensen, as I said, owned by the Norcross Group, went to Italy and commissioned Touring to design a new car. And initially, the first prototypes were built, and they came out with a complete new image. The initial cars were built by Vignale, and the body shipped over to the UK, where the interior and the engine was fitted at their factories in West Bromwich. And in '66, on the Earl's Court Motor Show, they introduced the Interceptor. It's probably one of the most iconic cars. Everybody recognizes, has a little petrol in their blood. And of course, the FF, the four-wheel drive Jensen. Here we see some original drawings from Vignale, used during the building process. And here we see some cars leaving the factory in West Bromwich. So what made the Jensen FF so special? First of all, it looked like it was moving, even if it stood still, parked somewhere on the side of the road. But it was the first series production road car with four-wheel drive. That's not me, I'm hearing in the back. And it had four-wheel drive 15 years before Audi introduced it. And here you see that layout, transverse box going to the front, driving the front wheels, which also presented a problem. You see here, the wide tunnel was even wider because of that prop shaft going forward. And that prevented Jensen from making any left-hand drive cars, unfortunately. Here we see the standard engine bay of a standard Interceptor. And here another one. And we added 15 centimeters to the front of it in order to accommodate the drive shafts to the front wheels. It was also the first series production car with anti-lock braking. And that was derived from the Dunlop system called Maxaret. And that was introduced to reduce braking with 30% on aircrafts when they landed. And that was all incorporated into this Jensen FF. Other specs, 4.25 liter engine, around 320 horsepower, 3-speed transmission. Everybody laughs about it nowadays, but plenty of torque there, limited slip, but it was frightfully expensive. You could buy an Aston Martin DB6 and get some change, or a lot of change if you wanted to go for the FF. But despite all of this, it was called the car of the century and the safest car on earth by many magazines and journalists. So it had really meaning. And apart from that, it's a beautiful car to look at, very iconic, this big glass roof at the back. It's probably one of the most photogenic cars around. So looking at the technical advancements, it's a pity that they were only built in relatively small numbers. Only 320 have been built, and they were all sold, apart from a few exceptions. And we all know that Porsche did a lot of engineering for Audi. So you can guess where this comes from. Based on this, I think the Jensen FF deserves to be selected as the best car in the world. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jos. Thank you very much. I think that brings to a close our let's say the presentations from the speakers. But I'm sure there'll be many questions and answers. I guess we are opening up for the question answer session.
So if anybody has any questions for any participants, you can write it in the chat box. We'll screen through it and we can direct it to each of the speakers.
Yeah, there's a question from Indrajit Sarkar about the DS, about the reliability and the longevity of the hydraulic system. And could you also adjust the ride height and the ride quality and the height? I think I would let Ivo answer this one instead of, or Ravi, either of them for the matter, who would like to answer this one. Not me, though I might have the answer, but I think Ravi may want to answer this, or Ivo.
Ivo would be the right one to answer this.
The question, Ivo, is that what is the reliability and the longevity of the hydraulic system? And could you also adjust the ride height and the ride quality?
Yeah, the ride height you can adjust from the interior of the car. And that also gave the possibility, for instance, when you were on a country road and you were afraid of damaging the underside of this very aerodynamic car, you could actually set it on high level. So the whole car would raise. So you'd have the ground clearance of what I would say a Land Rover Defender, even above that. So that was a very interesting feature that was available until they stopped making hydropneumatic suspension in the last version of the C5 Citroen and the C6 as well, which was built until about 2009. So that was one thing. And then the longevity, they changed the system from one fluid to another fluid, because the first fluid they had with a different color was unstable. What you have to remember, when this car came out in 1955, they were using technology that even some aircraft didn't have. So I always say that this car was introduced in 1955, and by the time the 1967 DS came out with those turning headlamps that Ravi showed so beautifully, that was actually the big facelift. By that time, all the hydropneumatics and technology was sorted out, and you could say it was a reliable car. So I would say it was a car very much advanced in its time, but a little bit too advanced, because even the mechanics didn't know how to fix it in the beginning. But of course, this is not a problem now. For those of you who would like to have a classic DS, they know how to make them very, very reliable, so it's not an issue. So I hope I answered the question.
Thanks very much, Ivo. I think we'll move to the next question. There are many questions flowing. Too many questions for the matter. But anyway, one of them from Raymond Patel is the Miura that Simon Kidston pulled out of the barn. Who did that belong to? And there's a second question about the Miura from Arab Oberoi, which is what was the lever used to open the bonnet and the rear? I think, Mike, would you like to take over that and answer that one?
Hey, I don't know about Simon Kiston's car. He's a big dealer of very, very expensive cars. I know that the most expensive Miura sold up until today is 4.5 million euros. It's an extremely expensive. Normal Miura on the street today is about $1 million euros, just for a standard good quality Miura. But Simon Kiston probably went for much more than that. To open up the hood in the front and the rear, we had special levers inside the interior of the car to unlock the thing. And you have to rock it back by hand, since it's such a big piece of sheet metal to open the whole thing up. But you have to have one on the left and the right, in the front and the rear, and then you open the whole thing up. So,
The other question from Satya. This is again a DS question. Citroen DS is about the unusually long gestation period of the DS. So as an automotive product, do you think they got it brilliantly right because they had the luxury of time? Is a question maybe again Ivo would like to answer, or would Ravi prefer answering that one?
Well, you know, they started the VGD project before it was called DS right after the war, 1947. So when it came out in 1955, like I said, it was such a radical design in every aspect. Even what wasn't mentioned is it was supposed to have a new engine in it. It was supposed to have a flat six, designed by a fellow named Walter Beccia, who was actually a big fan of BMW motorcycles. So he had a flat 2-cylinder motorcycle, and he had designed this wonderful flat six, but they ran out of money. You know, what you have to understand is that this is post-war Europe, and specifically post-war France, and they just ran out of money. So all this development time, it's also about the means that they had, and it was just financial means. They just ran out of money. They did not have a lack of ideas. They had a lack of funding to develop them, and that's why you know, today if you were to bring out a new car, people expect everything to work from day one. At that time, there were good cars and bad cars, which is no longer the case now. So then it's more a question of how much patience did you have to get your car sorted out. So if you were one of the first owners of a 1955 DS, you were probably very often in the shop, because the project was kept so secret. Most mechanics did not know how to work on that car because they were not formed to do so. Because they figured if we had to train the mechanics of all the dealers how to work on this car, then the secret would come out. So this is really an amazing story, and we don't have time to go into it, but I hope I answered the question.
It's interesting that here's Ivo not defending his choice, because nobody's challenged his or never questioned anything about the. Yeah.
Because it's the best car in the world. I don't have to defend it, and I love the DS. But let me just make a quickie. It's not really nice to do this, but I would have taken the DS if it had come out in 1955 and had been perfect. Obviously, because technologically it was the most advanced. But the best car in the world was the Mercedes. That's just the way it is. And you know.
So we're not okay. So
9/11.
I think yes. Yeah, and then of course there's 9/11 is what Rafiq is quietly from behind the scenes keep shouting. The point there, of course, is that 9/11, there are, as Rafiq yourself said, there are 8 generations. It's not the same car. So maybe there's another issue, but we're not getting into these kind of details. But any other questions? Any other points that somebody would like to ask, make a point about, add to the debate? I can see in the chat there's a lot of discussions going on, and somebody asked as to why is the MGTC not there? Simply because Rupert's just restoring a beautiful TC, and he's very, very distressed that somehow the TC was never under consideration. So maybe somebody would like to add something to that.
Gautam, can I say something?
Yes, please, Rafiq.
The cars that were presented today, I really love the Miura. I mean, it's one of my dream cars. Of course, I cannot afford a $4 million car. I love the Dino. I love the DS. I love the Corniche. But except for the DS and the 911, I mean, the other cars are not really practical cars. Not everybody can afford the Corniche. Not everybody can afford the Miura. Not everybody can afford the Jensen. So the DS and the 911 are really cars that anybody can afford. Of course, you're going to tell me the 911 now, the value is getting higher and higher every year. But it's a car that is easy to live with. It's an iconic car. It's like a Coca-Cola bottle. It's like the McDonald's M.
Rafiq,
It's one of the top 10 iconic
it
brands.
won't be fair because you get into the next 3 minutes on explaining that.
Okay,
so it won't be fair to people. I also noticed that Raghu, in fact, mentioned cars like the Lancia Aurelia, the Jaguar E-Type and the XK120. Oh, I mean, honestly, I think if we're going to start discussing, it's endless. And there are some extraordinary and amazing cars made each of those decades, whether it's the 50s, whether it's the 60s, whether it's the 70s. But maybe we are now ready for the voting. What do you think? Or is there any other points, question that we'd like to add to this? There is Jehangir who mentions about the Panhard Dyna. And that's very interesting. The fact that several, whether the body style was who influenced whom, the same thing that Mike might want to add to that between the Citroen DS and the Panhard Dyna and the Studebaker. Don't forget that Studebaker Starliner, the 53 from Remoloi, also the front end and the DS, there's a lot of similarities. So yes, I think this is an endless debate. Maybe we should take each of these topics as a separate point at some point, and we can all fight over that. But should we now go ahead and launch the vote? I think we should, maybe, right?
Yeah, to complete to what you're saying, Gautam, we're talking about the best car. We're not talking about the most beautiful car or the most original car. We're talking about the best car. That is the topic today. I think that makes the choice so difficult.
And what defines best?
Exactly.
Itself is another thing, which incidentally 2 months back when we had the first of these, John Presnell went into a long, let's say, I won't call it a debate because it was a monologue. It was all by himself, where he went into a long thing about what do you define as best? And it's a difficult, that in itself is another topic by itself. So let's, I think, get down to the voting, and I can see that the aspects like the Alpha 1900 SSZ, wow, that's something else. And it just carries on. So I think the choice can be, but I think the voting should be, probably we should go ahead with the polling option now. In the meantime, maybe you can guys can carry on with the discussions.
Yeah, it's interesting, the question of Evo. What's the best and what's the most beautiful?
There can be certain parameters on which we can decide on each category. Can you hear me, please?
Yeah, yes, we can, yes.
Like design aspect, engineering aspect, quality aspect, reliability aspect, and performance aspect. So if we can think along these lines, so the answer would be more on the target.
Thank you.
You guys can see the option. Just click on the option and press.
I can see that already people are voting. Something's happening.
Rolls-Royce Corniche, the second one.
Somebody's going to be happy today.
Everybody is happy. At the end, cars win. Any car that wins.
Our passion wins.
Okay, we have well, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we stop. So the winner is the DS, Citroen DS, which got 25% of the votes. Number 2 was the Porsche 911 with 22% of the votes. And then the 300 SL did 20% of the votes.
Good.
Yeah, the Miura was at 12%. The Dino at 10, the Rolls at 7, and Jensen FF at 5.
Super.
Yeah, not bad.
Ravi, well done.
No, I had a voice problem. It's not counted. Let's repeat it.
Let's do it again right now.
Yeah.
Before nighttime.
Yes.
Okay,
Elise,
great.
I would have voted for the Corniche just for those beautiful pictures you took in.
No, thank
your
you.
car.
Exactly.
Thank you.
So I think, well, anyway, it's been a damn good one, and I must say, you just can carry on, and you know, I mean, it's such a interesting point. Talking about Porsche's, Rafiq, it's a point I'd like to make, which I think still bothers me about the 911, is
Yes.
that if Ferdinand Porsche was around, or was, I mean, if he had the money, don't forget that his first prototype was mid-engined. And
Exactly.
because he didn't have the money, he decided to go ahead with the Beetle's base, right? If he had the resources, he wouldn't have made a rear engine car. And you think of that, and you think of it that the 911 since 48, 49, whatever it would have been a mid-engine car. And it would never have been rear engined. And so what you think was one of the most iconic cars in the world would have been even more iconic if it was mid-engine, just imagine. And it never was. So that in itself, it's a very interesting thought and an interesting point. And then you wonder whether the 911 wouldn't have been what it was if it was for the fact that they didn't have the resources.
This is a very, very interesting point that you raised. Because of the constraints, constraints, they picked the VW Beetle, which after was the car that evolved and became the first Porsche, the 356, and the 911 picked up from there.
Exactly. So it's more by
everybody
default.
said that, yes, and everybody said that the 911, when it came out, that the handling was dangerous. This is not a true proper sports car. The tail was, I mean, the car was, you know, the handling was not its most important, but Porsche proved them wrong. Of course, when the turbo came out in 1974, it was too powerful, so it was very hard to drive. They called it the Widowmaker.
So don't you think my argument is that because it was a very flawed car, which was flawed in its engineering, and because it became such a challenge, it's like you separated the boys from the men with the Porsche 911, which is why its reputation was built up on the wrong premises. So its reputation has been built up on the fact that you are a man if you could handle a Porsche 911.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you weren't. So in that sense, maybe it's not necessarily, it's still the fact that intrinsically it is flawed in its engineering. That remains a fact, come what may. And marketing eventually took greater precedence over engineering. So
and
anyway,
like I said,
this is a very interesting debate by itself, I think, and you can carry on discussing this. Yeah. And that with the DS, the other fascinating thing is what Ivo brought up is that imagine if the DS, again, they had enough resources to be able to put in the engine that they needed to put in and to make the car as long as Bertoni wanted it to be. The design would have been even nicer, you know?
Yes.
So
then it would have been the best car. And if they'd had the money to develop that before bringing it out, the reputation would have been good. Yeah.
Yeah, I was saying that the DS, you know, it's a superlative car. But when I considered it according to the criteria that I fixed, I mean, this is not to say that it's not a good choice. It's a fabulous choice. But the engine was a bit of a letdown. You know, considering the rest of the car, the harmony, I mean, the engine should have been superlative, considering that the rest of the car was superlative.
Yes, it was an outdated engine.
Engine was
harmony that, you know,
engine was underpowered.
Absolutely.
Engine was underpowered.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that and the fact that it was out of date.
At the same time, you consider the car doing this London-Sydney marathon.
Well, it's don't forget the first London-Sydney marathon was won by the Hillman Hunter, which is not doesn't figure in any list of any best car anywhere in the world.
I also
it's like Maurice Minor being given time to do a cross country. It will definitely reach, but slowly.
Exactly.
Gautam?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Yeliz, go ahead.
I also believe DS was, in a common sense, the best one, because the headlights, the turning headlights of DS was then a big technology, and later on it was reused around 2000s at C5 models. And when it was used that time, it was announced as a big innovation. But it was already used in DS. And also I like the similar sound of DS meaning goddess.
Goddess.
And Yeliz, you know that your Corniche has DS suspension in it. If you open the hood of the Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow when it first came out, up until the Corniche, when you open the hood, it says Brevet Citroën, because the hydrodynamic self-leveling suspension came from the DS, and Rolls-Royce did not have the means to develop that. They could make airplane engines, but they did not have the means to develop a system as good as the DS. And so they decided to pay Citroën to use it, this patent, and Citroën said, no problem, but it has to be notified underneath the hood. So discreetly, but you'll notice, you open the hood of any car from the Silver Shadow on, it says Brevet Citroën. So French engineering and an English car.
There you go. An interesting thing about the DS is that if you go to the Automobile Museum in Torino, Malto, there's a Hall of Fame for car designers. And there are 13 car designers featured in this Hall of Fame. And 11 of them, when they were asked, what is your favorite all-time car? 11 of them said DS.
So we're all right. Yeah.
Yes, two people selected the Strato Zero, myself and Manzoni. The other guys all selected the DS. So
and half of those guys, Mike, if asked the question, which is the car you would have loved to have designed, even though they were design legends, also say the DS.
Yeah.
Including Giugiaro and Gandini.
Yeah.
That's for them the car they would have liked to have done.
Yeah, it's incredible how they that's sort of the sculptor's car of all sculptors.
Yeah.
And which is where this other discussion, the other day was the fact that Bertoni, who designed the DS, also designed the Citroën Ami.
Yes.
Which is probably arguably one of the ugliest cars in the world ever.
It was his favorite design.
Precisely, and which he thought was his best design. So it says a lot about these things, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, well.
Gautam, I wanted to add something regarding what you said about the position of the engine of the 911 because of the financial constraints. But Porsche want to maintain that sports car with two seats in the back. And it was important for them. And you cannot do that with the mid-engine car.
Well, you did. With the Matra, don't forget that Matra, who was the first to do a mid-engine car, the Jet, what was the Bonnet, the Bonnet Jet and the Matra, had +2 for the 530. So +2, and then the Lamborghini Miura and all that took it further. So it's possible. But you needed to they needed to move a little later for that to get the packaging quite correct. Sure. And you needed to be probably a transverse location, ahead of the rear axle line, not longitudinal.
Not longitudinal, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So those are, of course, again, we can keep discussing. I think at some point we should call this off because we could otherwise. I don't know if you guys in India are thinking of dinner at all, or Harit, you're there. I notice you don't have a glass of beer in front of you. I don't know what you're doing without that.
No, I was just thinking about the Citroën, the DS. When it came out, I actually seen it in childhood because we were living in Europe. And there was one more thing, nobody talks about it, but when you park the car, it sat down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It just sank.
Yeah. Ravi talked about it in his presentation.
Yes. And I have seen this too. The only time that I've actually seen a DS was during a rally in Bombay, almost 20 years ago. And the car looked so beautiful sitting down. You could not see the rear wheel at all.
Yeah, it was
actually you just have to come to my neighborhood. There is a DS just on from the road from here, which is parked constantly. They're parked. It's always sitting down because it's very rarely up and about.
Ravi, have you
Michael,
ever driven a semi-automatic DS?
No, I have not driven a DS at all.
I tried to drive one a couple of months ago, a semi-automatic DS from 1973. And I can tell you, I mean, you really need some training before you can go with that car on the road. And why I love also the DS, or how I discovered the DS, because of a French actor called, he passed away in 1984. He was a very well-known comedian, French actor called Louis de Funès. And I think the past 20 years of his life, all his movies, he was driving a DS.
Yes.
And I started liking the DS thanks to, or because of Louis de Funès movies.
Yeah, good point. Rabbi Jacob was a good one with the
exactly
on the roof with the boat on the roof.
Exactly. So which is what I'm saying. Everybody thinks of Rabbi. To me, Louis Funès and it's Rabbi Jacob and the DS there, of course.
Yes,
absolutely.
Exactly. And if you've seen the movie called The Brain with David Niven and Jean-Paul Belmondo,
David Niven.
That is all about DS.
And the DS breaks in half, and the front half they keep driving at the last bit, which is very funny. I think. I mean, I can see that movie 10 times over and keep laughing each time for the same silly scenes. But exactly.
Yeah. Remy Julien did that stunt, and he did the same again for a James Bond movie with Roger Moore.
With Roger
and
Moore.
It was a Renault 19, so it was less memorable.
Yes.
Or Renault 9 or whatever, 11, something ugly.
Anyway. 9 or 11, yeah, you're right. One of the recent ones.
And there was a Citroën de Chevaux in the James Bond movie, the yellow one.
Yes.
That's famous.
Carole Bouquet. Very beautiful Carole Bouquet, the yellow one.
Yes, Carole Bouquet, yes.
Yes, beautiful lady.
And by the way, Raghu, I must tell you that I've seen Monica Bellucci live.
Even I've seen, she's come to Cartier's events.
Monica Bellucci?
Of course.
No, you're making a mistake. Not Monica Bellucci. No, not Monica. You're making.
How could she come without asking Gautam?
Exactly. How is that possible? Monica Bellucci, you're mixing up. Not Monica Bellucci. Monica Bellucci was in a flight from Rome to Paris, where she was, of course, sitting right in the front row. But her bag had gone at the back, so she was waiting for it, and nobody got off the damn plane. Everyone was waiting for the bag to come all the way to Monica because nobody was getting off the damn plane till Monica didn't get off. I mean, we'll never forget that exactly.
So, if you have to associate a woman to the DS.
No,
that is tricky. That's a tricky question.
That's tricky. We're not.
We don't have time.
No,
we don't smoke cigars. We don't smoke cigars.
And we don't connect women to cars.
It's not politically correct anymore.
To finish with a funny note.
Yes, on that. Okay, fantastic. So I think we all had a really good time, and we should do this more often. And so we thank. So let's take this opportunity to thank CDC family, consisting of Shobik, Prithvi, Rupak, and the rest of the people there, all members who are very much a part of it. I think you guys are doing a terrific job, and we must have more of this. Maybe we have to do it every month or every fortnight. So thanks once again, Shobik. Thanks once again, Prithvi. Thanks, Rupak, and the rest of you guys here. Really.
Thank you to all of you for joining in, and it's been great. So thank you. It's you who makes it possible. So,
but we didn't see
the community together.
We haven't seen Prithvi at all throughout this whole thing today. Rupak, of course, was very upset about MG.
Prithvi's been adding in people and things like that. So he's been very busy, right?
I guess he's sweating it out, adding people. That's right. I can understand.
And also,
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for a wonderful debate.
I would like to add something. The design of the mailings, and also the video made was also fantastic. Thank you for that.
Yeah, good graphics.
Good show.
Are you
Great.
guys
So,
going to do some highlights and maybe do some sort of link where we can have some best of moments?
I hope so. I think
yes.
I've recorded it. Maybe I've recorded. I'm not sure myself now. You see, Edith, I need a whole lesson. I need to get to Calcutta. Or you guys have to come across and help me sort this damn thing out.
And Gautam, congratulations for your Zoom diploma.
I've yet to earn it. I hope in one of these,
getting there.
in about 17 years, I might be able to master this. Yeah. So
This was all a trial. Now we will meet next week for the real voting.
yes.
Oh, now she tells us.
Yes, I
Exactly.
agree.
Yeah. So
Okay.
thanks,
Bye,
thanks
everybody.
guys. Thanks everybody.
Have a good
Thank you,
time.
everybody.
Have a good
Have a nice
day.
weekend.
Bye.
Take
Enjoy.
care.
Bye.
Bye.
Stay
Have
safe.
a lovely weekend.
Ciao.
Bye, guys.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.